No one showed up for my daughter's open heart surgery. 3 days later, my father texted me asking for $7,000 to buy my brother a custom wedding tuxedo. I sent him exactly 15 cents with the message, "Buy him a tie." Then I permanently locked them out of the $50,000 credit line they had been draining for years. But that was only the beginning of the nightmare. My name is Clara. I am 34 years old and somehow still healing from wounds my family inflicted. If you have ever been bled dry by the people who share your blood, hit the like button and subscribe. You will want to hear exactly how I turned my golden child brother's extravagant wedding into a federal crime scene. The surgical waiting room was a sterile freezing box that smelled of bleach and stale coffee. For 9 excruciating hours, I sat alone in a hard plastic chair, staring at the heavy double doors of the operating room. My 8-year-old daughter, Lily, was undergoing a complex open-heart procedure to repair a congenital defect she had been battling since birth. My husband passed away 3 years ago in a fatal car accident, leaving me to navigate this terrifying reality completely alone. But I was not supposed to be entirely alone today. My parents, Richard and Susan, had promised they would be here. My younger brother, Brandon, 31 years old, and supposedly my closest living relative, had sworn he would sit with me and hold my hand. At hour 4, I checked my phone. 0 missed calls, 0 text messages. At hour 6, a nurse came out to tell me they had to put Lily on a cardiopulmonary bypass machine. My hands were shaking so violently I dropped my phone twice trying to dial my mother's number. It went straight to voicemail. I called my father. Voicemail. I called Brandon. It rang 4 times before he forwarded it directly to his answering machine. I sat there staring at the blank screen, the realization hitting me like a physical blow to the chest. They were not coming. They had never intended to come. Growing up in our household in Seattle meant learning your place early. Brandon was the undisputed center of the universe. When I worked 3 jobs during college to avoid drowning in student loans, my parents took out a second mortgage to buy Brandon a brand new sports car because he felt left out by his fraternity brothers. When my husband died, my mother spent the entirety of the wake complaining about how the gloomy atmosphere was stressing Brandon out right before a big job interview. I was always the scapegoat, the quiet, responsible one who was expected to absorb the family financial shocks, clean up their messes, and never ask for anything in return. Currently, Brandon was engaged to Nia, an African-American woman who came from a highly educated, affluent family. Nia was a senior financial auditor at a top-tier accounting firm, sharp, no-nonsense, and fiercely intelligent. Brandon had spent the last 2 years pretending to be a wildly successful entrepreneur to impress her and her sophisticated parents. In reality, he was a 31-year-old man-child who had not held a steady job in 4 years. His entire wealthy businessman persona was funded by my parents, who were secretly funneling money to him to keep up the facade. And where did my parents get that money? From me. 3 years ago, shortly after my husband passed away, my parents came to me crying. They claimed they were on the brink of foreclosure due to overwhelming medical debts. Vulnerable and grieving, I opened a high-limit joint credit card in my name, giving them an authorized user card for groceries and absolute emergencies. For the past 3 years, I had been blindly paying off the balance every month, assuming they were just trying to survive. I never scrutinized the line items because I was too busy raising a sick child and working to keep a roof over our heads. At hour 9, Dr. Collins finally walked through the double doors. He pulled off his surgical cap, offering a tired but genuine smile. He told me she did incredibly well, the defect was fully repaired, and she was in the intensive care unit recovering. I broke down crying, the adrenaline of the past day completely leaving my body in heavy, heaving sobs. I thanked him profusely and rushed to the intensive care unit. Seeing my tiny daughter surrounded by monitors and intravenous lines broke my heart, but the steady, rhythmic beeping of her heart monitor was the most beautiful sound in the world. I sat by her bed for 3 days straight, sleeping in an uncomfortable vinyl chair, entirely consumed by her recovery. It was on the evening of the 3rd day that my phone finally buzzed. It was not a call asking if my daughter had survived her open heart surgery. It was a text message from my father, Richard. Hey, Clara. Brandon's final suit fitting is tomorrow. Nia's family is going all out and he needs to look the part. Can you send $7,000 for his custom tuxedo? We are a little tight on cash this week. Thanks. I stared at the glowing pixels on my screen. My daughter had her chest cracked open. I had been eating hospital vending machine crackers for 72 hours, and my father wanted $7,000 for a wedding suit. I felt my vision blur with a rage so pure and concentrated it left me breathless. I decided to call my mother Susan, needing to hear her voice, needing to know if she possessed a shred of maternal instinct. She answered on the fourth ring. Loud thumping party music blasted in the background, accompanied by the clinking of glasses and booming laughter. Clara, honey, she yelled over the noise. Good to hear your voice. I assume Lily's surgery went fine. I gripped the phone tightly. She is in the intensive care unit, Mom. She was on a bypass machine. Where are you? Oh, do not make a big deal out of it. Susan scoffed dismissively. It was just a minor procedure. We are at a wine tasting event for Brandon's wedding reception. Nia's family is here and we simply could not leave and be rude. You understand how important appearances are. She hung up before I could say another word. I sat in the quiet hum of the intensive care unit looking at the phone in my hand. A veil lifted from my eyes. I did not cry. I did not type out a furious emotional paragraph demanding to know why they were not here. Emotional reactions were exactly what they expected from me. They thrived on my guilt and my desperate need for their approval. Instead, I opened my banking application. I navigated to the joint credit card account I had maintained for them. I scrolled through the recent transactions. $1,200 at a luxury day spa, $4,500 at a high-end caterer, $800 at a boutique wine shop. They were not using my credit line to survive. They were using my money to fund Brandon's extravagant wedding rehearsal, desperately trying to match the socioeconomic status of Nia's family. They had abandoned my daughter to die so they could taste wine and pick out floral arrangements on my dime. With a calmness that felt almost frightening, I tapped the screen. I locked the card. I removed the authorized users. I reported the card as stolen. Within 30 seconds, I had completely severed their access to the $50,000 credit line. I then opened my checking account. I typed in Brandon's account routing number. I entered the transfer amount of 15 cents. In the memo line, I wrote, "Buy him a tie." I hit send. Then I put my phone on airplane mode, leaned back in the uncomfortable hospital chair, and held my sleeping daughter's hand. For the first time in my 34 years of existence, I felt absolutely no guilt toward my family. I had cut the cord. The financial pipeline was dead. I knew they operated on appearances. To my parents, the worst thing in the world was not failing as a parent or grandparent. It was looking poor in front of rich people. Brandon had undoubtedly planned a massive shopping spree for the following morning, intending to swipe a piece of plastic with my name on it to prove to Nia's family that he was a self-made man. Let the games begin. The silent hospital room was the perfect command center for my counterattack. What my family did not know was that I was not just a struggling single mother scraping by on life insurance payouts. When my husband died, the grief threatened to consume me whole. Instead of letting it, I channeled every ounce of my despair into a single obsessive focus. I founded a health technology software company designed to streamline electronic medical records and coordinate critical care for pediatric hospitals. I knew firsthand how broken the medical system was because I had lived it with Lily. Every frustrating hour spent transferring her files became the blueprint for my software. I built the initial platform from my cramped dining room table while Lily slept. I pitched it to angel investors on video calls while pacing in hospital hallways. Over the last 2 years, my company had quietly exploded. Just 3 months ago, we closed a massive funding round, securing $10 million in venture capital. I was no longer a grieving victim. I was the chief executive officer of a highly profitable tech firm. I managed 50 software developers. I was a multimillionaire. But because I still drove a sensible sedan and wore practical clothes to the hospital, my family assumed I was just a lowly office worker drowning in debt. They thought they held the power because they thought they were manipulating a weak, dependent widow. They had absolutely no idea they had just declared war on an executive who routinely negotiated cutthroat corporate contracts before breakfast. The next morning, sunlight crept through the blinds of the intensive care unit. Lily was breathing steadily, her vital signs strong and stable. I kissed her forehead, walked out to the hallway, and at exactly 9:15, I turned off airplane mode on my phone. My phone instantly froze as an avalanche of notifications flooded the screen. 47 missed calls, 52 text messages, 14 voicemails. I scrolled through the chaos, watching the timeline of my brother's humiliation unfold in real time. The earliest messages started around 8 in the morning, full of arrogant entitlement. Brandon had texted asking why the transfer was only 15 cents, demanding I fix the glitch immediately because he was walking into the luxury tailor shop with Nia's father. He sent a photo of himself in front of the mirror, grinning smugly, completely oblivious to the financial guillotine I had just dropped on his neck. By 8:45, the tone shifted to panic. "Clara, answer the phone. The card is declining." The clerk is staring at me. Nia's father is asking questions I cannot answer. "Do something." Then came the sheer rage from my mother. The most recent text was a long block of furious capitalization from Susan. "Clara Marie, what is going on?" Brandon's card declined at the bespoke tailor right in front of Nia's father. "The bank said the account is permanently closed." "Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is?" Nia's father, a senior partner at a law firm, had to step in and pay for Brandon's tuxedo. Brandon looked like an absolute fool. "Fix this immediately, or do not bother coming to the rehearsal dinner." I read the message twice, a cold, satisfied smile touching the corners of my mouth. I could picture the scene perfectly. Brandon swaggering into an exclusive boutique, trying to act like a master of the universe alongside a prominent attorney. He would have casually tossed down the platinum card that bore my name, fully expecting me to foot the bill for his vanity. I could imagine the exact shade of red his face turned when the cashier handed the card back, shaking their head. I could see the sharp, calculating look in Nia's father's eyes as he reached for his own wallet to bail out a grown man who claimed to be a wealthy entrepreneur but could not even afford his own wedding attire. The facade was cracking, and it had only cost me 15 cents. I did not reply. I simply locked my screen, slipped the phone into my pocket, and went to the hospital cafeteria to get a fresh cup of coffee. The escalating conflict was no longer a burden, it was a carefully controlled demolition, and I had my finger hovering directly over the detonator. I knew my silence would drive them completely insane. My mother was a woman who demanded immediate compliance. Ignoring her text was the ultimate act of defiance, a direct challenge to her authority. I walked back toward the intensive care unit elevators, savoring the bitter taste of the dark roast coffee. My mind was sharp, calculating the next moves. They were entirely predictable. When text messages and phone calls failed to produce the desired result, they would inevitably escalate to physical confrontation. They would come to the hospital not to check on their granddaughter who had just survived open heart surgery, but to corner me and force me to reopen the financial floodgates so they could continue their charade. I mentally prepared my responses, anticipating their manipulation tactics, their guilt trips, and their threats of exclusion. They had used the threat of cutting me off from the family as a weapon for years. They did not realize that I no longer feared isolation. I welcomed it. Just as the elevator doors chimed open on the 4th floor, my phone vibrated with one final threatening message from Brandon. "You are dead to me. Mom and Dad are on their way to the hospital right now. You better have that card unlocked before they get there, or you are going to regret it." I read the words and let out a soft, genuine laugh. They were literally rushing to a pediatric cardiac ward to throw a tantrum over a declined credit card. It confirmed every decision I had made the night before. This was the end of their manipulation. I stepped out into the brightly lit hospital corridor. When the doors slid open to the ground floor, I spotted them. My mother Susan was storming through the glass entrance doors like a hurricane in Kashmir. Her face was flushed a furious red. Right behind her was my father Richard, his jaw set in a tight, angry line. They had not managed to visit the hospital for 3 agonizing days while their granddaughter's chest was sliced open. But a declined credit card had them sprinting through these doors in record time. I stood my ground near the vinyl chairs holding my coffee. I simply waited. It took Susan less than 10 seconds to lock onto me. She marched across the lobby, ignoring the curious stares of passing nurses. "Clara Marie," she hissed, packing every syllable with pure venom. "What is wrong with you?" My father stepped up beside her, grabbing my upper arm and trying to pull me toward a secluded corner. It was an old intimidation tactic. Today it felt incredibly pathetic. I sharply yanked my arm out of his grasp, causing him to stumble slightly. "Do not touch me, Richard," I said, my voice eerily calm and devoid of fear. My mother gasped, clutching her expensive handbag. "How dare you speak to your father that way? Do you have any idea the absolute humiliation your brother just went through this morning? Do you understand the damage you caused?" I took a slow sip of my coffee. I imagine he tried to buy a $7,000 tuxedo with money he does not have. Susan shook with fury. Nia and her father were standing right there in the fitting room. Her father watched the clerk cut the platinum card. The bank told the tailor the account was closed for fraud. Brandon had to stand there while Nia's father pulled out his wallet to pay for the suit. Brandon looked like an absolute fool. The entire family looks like a joke now. Nia was asking questions about his business accounts that he could not answer. "It is not my card," I corrected her softly. "It is my account. You and Brandon were authorized users. The key word in that sentence is were. Turn it back on right now," my father demanded, stepping closer. "Nia comes from a prominent African-American family. They expect a certain standard of living. We have the rehearsal dinner to pay for this weekend. The floral deposits are due by 5 o'clock today. You are embarrassing this family over a petty temper tantrum." "A petty temper tantrum," I repeated. My 8-year-old daughter had open-heart surgery on Monday. She was on a cardiopulmonary bypass machine for 2 hours. Neither of you called. Neither of you showed up to hold my hand. You were busy tasting wine for a wedding reception. My mother waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, please, Clara, do not play the victim. We knew Lily was going to be fine. It is just a routine procedure. Children bounce back instantly, but Brandon's wedding is a once-in-a-lifetime event. The social connections we are making with Nia's family could secure his future forever. You are being completely unreasonable and selfish." The sheer audacity of her statement washed over me, but the anger I expected was not there. Instead, I felt a profound sense of liberation. For years, I had twisted myself into knots trying to prove my worth to these people. I had paid their bills and accepted their crumbs of affection. Seeing them now frantically defending a lie to impress strangers while their granddaughter lay in the intensive care unit upstairs erased any lingering doubt. "You told Nia's family that Brandon is a successful entrepreneur," I stated factually. "You told them he built his own business. He is an entrepreneur," my father argued, his face reddening. "He just needs capital to get his project off the ground. That is what families do. We provide the capital so he can succeed." "You provide my capital," I corrected him. "You have been funneling my credit line to him so he can play a wealthy businessman." But the reality is that he is 31 years old, unemployed, and entirely dependent on his widowed sister to buy his clothes. If he wants to marry a financial auditor, he should let her audit his actual bank account. "You vindictive witch," my mother spat, her voice rising loud enough to turn several heads. "If you do not unlock that card by noon today, you are strictly forbidden from attending the rehearsal dinner or the wedding. You will be completely cut out of this family." It was their ultimate threat, the weapon they had wielded over my head since I was a vulnerable child. "Comply or we will abandon you." They did not realize they had already abandoned me on Monday. I had survived the worst day of my life without them. It freed me. "Keep the invitation, Susan," I said, offering a chilling, polite smile. "But you might want to save your energy. You are going to need it to explain to Nia's sophisticated family why the wealthy entrepreneur they are marrying into cannot afford a simple parking fee without his sister's permission. I turned my back on them and walked away. The conflict was no longer a burden. It was a controlled demolition, and I held the detonator. As I took my first step toward the elevator bank, the heavy, frantic thud of my father's leather shoes echoed against the tile floor behind me. He was a man who had commanded absolute obedience in our household for 3 decades, and being dismissed by his scapegoat daughter was a reality his ego simply could not process. "Clara, stop walking away from me right this second," he bellowed, his voice cutting through the low murmur of the hospital lobby. I did not break my stride. I kept my eyes fixed on the silver elevator doors ahead. In the past, that tone would have paralyzed me. It was the voice that preceded long, grueling lectures about my inadequacies and my inherent duty to serve the family. Today it sounded remarkably like the desperation of a cornered animal. A heavy hand clamped down on my left shoulder, pulling me backward with enough force to spill hot coffee over the rim of my cup and onto my wrist. I spun around, the scalding liquid stinging my skin, but my expression remained entirely composed. Richard stood towering over me, his chest heaving, his face a mask of unrestrained authority. "You do not walk away when I am speaking to you," he ordered, his grip tightening. "You are going to take out your phone, you are going to call the bank, and you are going to authorize a temporary release of those funds so Brandon can pay for his suit. Then we are going to sit down and discuss how you are going to make this right with Nia's family." Before I could utter a single word in response, a stern voice interrupted us. "Is there a problem here, Mom?" I glanced to my right. 2 hospital security guards, both tall and broad-shouldered, had quietly approached from the main reception desk. They had clearly been observing the escalating situation, watching a grown man forcefully grab a woman in the middle of a pediatric hospital. My father instantly dropped his hand from my shoulder, stepping back and pasting on a tight, artificial smile. "There is no problem here, officers," Richard said smoothly, his tone instantly shifting from tyrannical to jovial. "Just a family disagreement. Emotions are running high. My daughter here is under a lot of stress, and we are just trying to help her manage things." Susan finally caught up, panting slightly as she adjusted her designer scarf. She immediately fell into her favorite role, the long-suffering, deeply concerned matriarch. "Yes, please excuse us," she chimed in, offering the guards a strained, apologetic look. "My poor daughter is just exhausted. Her child is in the intensive care unit, and she is not thinking clearly. She is having a bit of a mental breakdown, and we are simply trying to get her to see reason." The audacity of her words was breathtaking. They were attempting to weaponize my grief and use it to paint me as an unstable, hysterical woman to hospital security, all to maintain their control over my bank accounts. I looked directly at the older of the 2 guards. My voice was steady, clear, and perfectly modulated. "I am not having a breakdown," I stated calmly. "I am the sole guardian of a patient in the pediatric intensive care unit. These 2 individuals are my estranged parents. They are currently harassing me because I recently cut off their access to my finances. I do not want them near me, and I certainly do not want them anywhere near my daughter's recovery room. I would like them escorted off the premises immediately." The guard's expression hardened. He looked from my composed demeanor to my father's suddenly panicked face. My father stepped forward, his jovial mask slipping entirely. "Now wait just a minute, Clara. You cannot kick us out. We have a right to be here. We have a right to see our granddaughter." "You have not been to this hospital once in the 3 days since your granddaughter had her chest cracked open," I replied, my voice echoing slightly in the sudden quiet of the lobby. "You did not come here to see Lily. You came here to demand $7,000 for a tuxedo. You have absolutely no rights here." The younger security guard stepped squarely between my father and me. "Sir, you need to leave the hospital immediately," he instructed, his tone leaving zero room for negotiation. "If you do not exit through those doors right now, we will be forced to involve the local police and have you formally trespassed from the property." Susan gasped, clutching her chest as if she had been physically struck. You are going to let them throw us out, she shrieked, all pretense of the concerned mother vanishing. You are doing this to your own family. Over what? Over money, you selfish, ungrateful brat. I stared at her, feeling a profound sense of closure wash over me. The invisible strings they had used to control me for 34 years simply snapped. Goodbye, Susan, I said. Have a wonderful time at the rehearsal dinner. I turned around and walked into the waiting open elevator car. As the silver doors slid shut, the final image I saw was my father being directed toward the exit by two stern security guards, while my mother yelled hysterically about how I was ruining Brandon's life. The heavy silence of the elevator was intoxicating. I rode it up to the fourth floor, feeling lighter than I had in decades. The toxic weight of their expectations, their manipulation, and their constant financial drain had vanished. I walked back into the intensive care unit, checked in with the attending nurse, and sat down in the vinyl chair next to Lily's bed. She was awake, her small fingers clutching the edge of the blanket. She offered me a weak, sleepy smile, and I felt my heart expand with pure love. I held her hand, whispering soft, encouraging words until she drifted back to sleep. For the next hour, the world was peaceful. But the quiet was ultimately short-lived. My phone buzzed silently in my pocket. I pulled it out, expecting perhaps another desperate text message from Brandon or a furious voicemail from my father in the parking lot. Instead, the screen displayed a high-priority email alert from Valerie, the chief financial officer of my health technology company. Valerie was a meticulous, brilliant woman who never reached out to my personal cell phone unless it was an absolute emergency. The subject line read, "Urgent Security Alert, Identity Theft Flagged." My stomach tightened. I tapped the notification, opening the secure email platform. Clara, the message read, "I need you to call me the exact second you see this. Our corporate identity monitoring service just triggered a massive Tier 1 alert on your personal social security number. Approximately 20 minutes ago, someone submitted a heavily expedited application for a $50,000 personal loan using your exact credentials. They used your full legal name, your previous residential address, and your social security number. The application was routed through a rapid approval online lending portal that caters specifically to high-interest short-term wedding and event financing. I stared at the glowing screen, the words burning into my retinas. 20 minutes ago. That was precisely the time my parents had been unceremoniously escorted out of the hospital lobby. The credit card cutoff had not just made them desperate, it had pushed them completely over the edge. They had crossed the line from toxic family dynamics and emotional manipulation straight into federal financial crimes. They were trying to steal $50,000 in my name to pay for Brandon's lavish wedding facade. The sheer audacity of their entitlement was staggering. They honestly believed that because I had always bailed them out in the past, I would simply absorb this fraudulent debt without a fight. They thought they could forge my signature, commit grand larceny, and walk away clean while I paid the bill. I stood up from the vinyl chair, my heart pounding a slow, deliberate rhythm. I walked out into the quiet, brightly lit hospital corridor, dialing Valerie's private number. The gloves were no longer just off. They were completely and permanently incinerated forever. Valerie answered on the first ring. Her voice was sharp, strictly professional, and laced with genuine concern. "Clara." "I already have the fraud department on the other line," Valerie stated without preamble. "They used a digital signature that mimics yours perfectly, but the internet protocol address traces back to a public coffee shop just 3 blocks away from your hospital. They are trying to push this through a subprime lender that approves funds in less than 24 hours. Should I have the legal team file the official police report right now?" I leaned against the hospital corridor wall. The sheer stupidity of their plan was insulting. They actually believed they could steal $50,000 using a public internet connection down the street from my recovering daughter. "No, Valerie," I replied, my voice remarkably steady. "Do not file the police report yet. Flag it as fraudulent to freeze the disbursement, but let the application stay active. I want the digital footprint preserved. I want the lender to compile every piece of data they submitted, the false income statements, forged signatures, and exact timestamps. When I drop the hammer, I want an airtight federal case, not a local misdemeanor. Valerie let out a low whistle of approval. Understood, Chief. I will have the cybersecurity team capture the data securely. What is your next move today? I am going to let them think they are winning, I said. I will call you back in an hour. I ended the call. My mind was racing, calculating my counteroffensive. My family operated entirely on the currency of public perception. To truly defeat them, I could not just cut off their money privately. I had to dismantle their facade in front of the audience they desperately wanted to impress. I walked back toward the intensive care unit. The financial coordinator was waiting near the nurse's station, holding a thick manila envelope. She handed it over with a sympathetic smile. It was the preliminary itemized medical bill for Lily's emergency surgery, her intensive care stay, and the surgical team. I opened the envelope and looked at the bold number printed at the bottom of the last page, $120,000. Before I could process the figure, my phone buzzed again. It was an unknown number. I opened the text message. It was a long, incredibly formal paragraph. Hello, Clara. This is Nia. I apologize for intruding during what I understand is a difficult time for you. Brandon and your parents have informed me that you are currently experiencing a severe mental health crisis and have unjustly frozen the family business accounts. Brandon is incredibly distressed. My father is highly concerned about the financial stability of the wedding arrangements. I would like to arrange a brief phone call to discuss how we can mediate this unfortunate situation and release the necessary funds immediately. I stared at the glowing screen. The audacity of my family was truly boundless. They had not only spun a web of lies about Brandon's imaginary wealth, but they had also preemptively labeled me as mentally unstable to explain exactly why their access to the money had suddenly vanished. They were using my grief over my sick child to paint me as a hysterical, irrational woman who was trying to sabotage her brother's happiness out of pure jealousy. They had actually sent a professional financial auditor to audit my behavior. They had severely miscalculated their strategy. Naya was not an emotional relative they could easily manipulate with fake tears and heavy guilt trips. She was a licensed professional auditor. She dealt strictly in hard numbers, verifiable facts, and concrete paper trails. If she wanted to audit the reality of this situation, I was more than happy to provide the necessary documentation. I did not call her back immediately. Instead, I walked over to the bright fluorescent lights of the nurse's station. I placed the thick stack of medical bills flat on the counter. I took out my phone and carefully photographed every single page. I made sure the patient name, the dates of service, and the staggering total of $120,000 were perfectly in focus. I compiled the images into a single high-resolution digital document. Then I opened the active text thread with Nia. I typed a simple, polite response. Hello, Nia. It is nice to finally hear from you. There is no mental health crisis, and there are absolutely no family business accounts. There is only my personal bank account, which my parents and brother have been draining for 2 years. My 8-year-old daughter just survived open heart surgery. Below is the preliminary medical bill I received 10 minutes ago. This is exactly why the financial pipeline to your fiancé has been permanently shut off. I suggest you ask Brandon how he plans to pay for a $7,000 tuxedo when he does not even have a job. I attached the document containing the $120,000 medical bill and hit send. I watched the delivery confirmation icon appear on the screen. I knew exactly what was happening on the other end. A senior auditor was staring at a verified hospital invoice that completely shattered the narrative she had been fed. The parents who claimed they were wealthy enough to fund a lavish wedding were actively ignoring a massive medical debt for their own granddaughter. The successful entrepreneur she was marrying was suddenly begging his allegedly unstable sister for suit money. The math was not adding up, and Nia was trained to spot exactly when the math was wrong. Less than 3 minutes later, my phone vibrated in my hand. It was Nia again. The formal tone from her previous message was entirely gone. Her response consisted of exactly 3 words. Call me now. I smiled, feeling a dangerous thrill course through my veins. The first bomb had officially been dropped. I walked into an empty room and dialed her number. I walked into an empty consultation room and dialed her number. Nia answered before the first ring even finished. When she spoke, her tone was entirely devoid of the polite warmth from her initial text message. It was the sharp, clinical voice of an auditor who had just discovered a massive discrepancy in a ledger. Clara, Nia said, her words clipped and precise. I am looking at the document you sent. It is a certified preliminary invoice from a major pediatric cardiac unit. The date of service was Monday. Your family told me you were simply refusing to contribute to the wedding out of spite because you were having a mental breakdown. They lied to you, Nia, I replied calmly, keeping my voice entirely steady. My daughter had open heart surgery on Monday. They did not show up. They did not call. Instead, my father asked me for $7,000 for Brandon's tuxedo. When I refused, they showed up at the hospital this morning to harass me. Hospital security escorted them off the premises 20 minutes ago. I heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. There was a long pause as Nia processed the information, and the family business accounts she finally asked. Brandon told my father that his assets were temporarily frozen due to a complicated corporate tax audit that you were mismanaging. I let out a harsh, humorless laugh. There are no corporate tax audits. There is no family business. Brandon is 31 years old and has not held a job since he was 27. The only money he has ever spent on you on this wedding or on his fake lifestyle has come directly from my personal bank accounts. My parents have been funneling my money to him to keep up the illusion that he is a successful entrepreneur. Yesterday I cut off their access. That is why his card declined at the tailor. Another heavy silence fell over the line. I could almost hear the gears turning in Nia's analytical mind. She was piecing together the timeline, the excuses, the defensive behavior Brandon had displayed whenever finances were discussed. But then she asked the exact question I knew an intelligent auditor would eventually ask. Clara, Nia started, her voice dropping an octave. I do not mean to sound insensitive, but Brandon and your parents have always portrayed you as a struggling widow who is barely making ends meet. They said you worked a low-level administrative job. If that is true, how exactly did you have a $50,000 credit line for them to drain? I smiled, looking out the window of the consultation room at the Seattle skyline. That is the part of the story my family does not know. When my husband passed away 3 years ago, I did not just sit at home and grieve. I spent every waking hour building a software platform designed to manage electronic medical records for pediatric intensive care units. I built a company from the ground up while raising a sick child. I am not a struggling office worker, Nia. I am the founder and chief executive officer of a health technology firm. 3 months ago, my company secured $10 million in venture capital. I am a multi-millionaire. My family thinks they have been manipulating a helpless victim because I drive a sensible car. They have absolutely no idea who they are actually dealing with. I heard a soft gasp, followed by a low chuckle that quickly morphed into cold anger. They played me, Nia whispered. They sat in my parents' home, drank our wine, and looked my father dead in the eye while spinning a massive financial fabrication. They thought I was just a naive trophy wife. They underestimated both of us, I stated firmly. But it gets much worse, Nia, and this is the primary reason I am telling you all of this. This is no longer just about a toxic family lying to save face. It has crossed over into federal territory. What do you mean? Nia demanded, her professional instincts instantly flaring. 20 minutes after I had hospital security throw my parents out of the lobby, I received an urgent security alert from my chief financial officer, I explained. Someone just used my social security number, my legal name, and a forged digital signature to apply for a $50,000 personal loan through a rapid approval online lender. They did it from a public internet connection 3 blocks from this hospital. Identity theft and wire fraud, Nia stated flatly. They are trying to steal $50,000 to fund the rehearsal dinner and the remaining wedding expenses Because they are terrified my family will discover the truth. Exactly, I confirmed. I have frozen the disbursement, but I am letting the application process continue to capture every piece of false documentation. I am building a federal case. I needed you to know because you are about to legally bind yourself to a man who is actively committing grand larceny. I would not marry that pathetic fraud if he were the last man on earth. Nia spat, her voice cold as ice. My father is a senior partner at a corporate law firm. We destroy financial criminals for a living. Clara, do not cancel your appearance at the rehearsal dinner tomorrow night. I blinked, surprised by her sudden shift in strategy. You want me to attend? Oh, absolutely, Nia said, and I could hear a dangerous smile in her voice. They are currently telling everyone that you are having a mental breakdown. Let them build that narrative. My entire family will be there. I want you to walk into that room and drop the evidence directly onto the dining table. I want to watch their fake empire burn to the ground. An alliance was finally forged. I will see you tomorrow night, Nia, I replied to her, ending the call. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, feeling a surge of adrenaline replacing the exhaustion of the past 3 days. The board was set. Nia was no longer a pawn in my family's sick game of pretend. She was the queen, and she was ready to flip the entire table. But before I could walk into that rehearsal dinner and execute the final blow, I needed airtight ammunition. I needed the exact digital paper trail of their federal crimes. I walked out of the empty consultation room and headed straight for the secluded quiet of the hospital courtyard. I needed fresh air and absolute privacy for my next conversation. I dialed Valerie. She answered instantly, her keyboard clacking furiously in the background. Tell me you have everything, I said, leaning against the cold brick wall. I have more than everything, Valerie replied, her voice vibrating with professional triumph. The cybersecurity team intercepted the entire data packet submitted to the subprime lender. You are going to want to sit down for this. They did not just use your social security number. They constructed an entire fabricated identity profile based on your old financial records. They submitted a forged letter of employment claiming you work as an executive assistant for a fictional company. They even fabricated 2 years' worth of tax forms. The sheer audacity of it made me laugh, a sharp, bitter sound that echoed in the empty courtyard. Do we have a definitive trace? We do, she confirmed. The Internet Protocol address traces back to a local coffee shop, but the application required a secondary verification step. A mobile phone number had to be linked to the account to receive the security authentication codes. They used a prepaid cellular device, but the recovery email address associated with that device is registered to Richard. Your father literally used his own personal email address as the backup contact for a fraudulent $50,000 loan. I closed my eyes, shaking my head at the profound arrogance and stupidity of the man who raised me. He had spent his entire life lecturing me about responsibility, yet he was leaving a digital trail of breadcrumbs so obvious a first-year law student could convict him. He honestly believed his absolute authority in our family shielded him from the actual laws of the real world. He thought I would simply absorb the financial blow. Print every single page of that application, Valerie. I instructed, my voice hardening into steel. I want the forged tax documents. I want the fake employment letter. I want the digital signature log with the exact timestamps. And I want the Internet Protocol trace linking it directly back to his recovery email address. Put it all into a single comprehensive dossier. Already done, Chief Valerie said. The physical file is sitting on my desk right now. It is a masterpiece of criminal incompetence. Do you want me to courier it to the hospital? No, I replied, looking up at the gray Seattle sky. I am leaving the hospital for a few hours tomorrow afternoon to go home and change for a very important dinner. I will swing by the corporate office to pick it up personally. Keep the application active with the lender for now. If we cancel it too early, they might get spooked. We need them to walk into tomorrow night believing they have successfully secured the $50,000. Valerie chuckled, a dark, satisfied sound. You are letting them walk right into the trap. They built the trap themselves, Valerie. I am just handing them the cheese. I thanked her for her brilliant work and ended the call. The pieces were locking into place with terrifying precision. I walked back inside the hospital and took the elevator up to the pediatric cardiac floor. The heavy doors of the intensive care unit slid open, welcoming me back into the quiet, rhythmic world of heart monitors. I walked into Lily's room. She was sitting up slightly, watching a cartoon on the small television mounted near the ceiling. Her color was better, the grayish pallor of her skin replaced by a faint, healthy pink. She looked at me and smiled, holding out her small hand. I took it, sitting in the vinyl chair beside her bed. "Are you okay, Mommy?" she asked, her voice raspy from the breathing tube they had removed the day before. I squeezed her hand gently. "I am perfect, baby. I am better than I have been in a very long time." We spent the rest of the afternoon in peaceful silence. Every time I looked at the long surgical incision running down her chest, I felt a renewed surge of conviction. My parents had abandoned this beautiful, brave little girl to sip wine and plan a party based on a mountain of lies. They had chosen their fake social status over her life. They were about to learn exactly how expensive that choice truly was. As evening fell over the city, the hospital room grew dim. I sat in the glow of the heart monitor, opening my laptop. I logged into my secure banking portal and initiated a complete lockdown on every account tied to my name. I severed every conceivable financial tie that could link my parents to my current legal identity. Next, I drafted a formal cease and desist letter using a template provided by my legal team. It detailed the exact statutes they had violated regarding identity theft, wire fraud, and familial financial abuse. I did not send it yet. It was simply waiting in my drafts folder, a loaded weapon ready to be fired the exact second the rehearsal dinner imploded. At 9 tonight, my phone lit up with a text message. It was from Susan. "Clara, we managed to secure a loan, but this mess is your fault. If you have any decency, you will attend the rehearsal dinner tomorrow and apologize." I typed 2 words. "I will." I put the phone down on the small table next to the hospital bed. The screen went dark, and with it, the last trace of my former life vanished. I spent the remainder of the night in a chair beside Lily, listening to the steady rhythm of her heart monitor. Sleep eluded me. My mind was a meticulously organized chessboard, plotting every possible move my parents might attempt the following evening. By sunrise, my strategy was flawless. The morning passed in a blur of medical consultations. Dr. Collins visited during rounds and officially downgraded Lily from critical to stable. When the afternoon nurse arrived, I packed a small overnight bag. My mother-in-law arrived at 2 o'clock to sit with Lily. I kissed my daughter's forehead, promising I would be back before she woke up. I walked out of the hospital into the crisp Seattle air, keys in hand. The drive to my corporate headquarters took 20 minutes. My health technology firm occupied the top 2 floors of a sleek glass building downtown. As I stepped out of the elevator onto the executive floor, the familiar hum of servers grounded me. I walked past the glass-walled conference rooms and headed straight for the corner office belonging to Valerie. She was waiting for me. Sitting in the exact center of her polished wood desk was a thick black leather folder. "Right on time," Chief Valerie said, gesturing to the folder. "I had legal review it this morning just to be absolutely certain. It is a slam dunk. They recommended we bypass local authorities entirely and take this straight to the Federal Bureau of Investigation Cybercrimes Division." I stepped forward and opened the leather cover. Inside was a stack of papers detailing the complete financial assassination my parents had attempted. The top document was the loan application. I traced my finger over the signature line. It was my name digitally rendered in a font designed to look like my actual handwriting. It was terrifyingly accurate. I turned the page. Next was the fabricated letter of employment. It was typed on fake corporate letterhead for a company called Apex Logistics. It claimed I had been an executive assistant there for 5 years, earning $45,000 a year. It was signed by a fictitious human resources director. The level of premeditation was staggering. They had spent hours constructing an entire alternate reality to secure $50,000. "Turn to page 4, Valerie instructed, crossing her arms. I flipped the heavy cardstock. It was the Internet Protocol trace log. Our cybersecurity team had pulled the exact routing data from the subprime lender's server. It displayed the timestamp, the physical address of the coffee shop, 3 blocks from the pediatric hospital, and the most damning piece of evidence of all. The backup authentication email address was listed clearly in black and white. richard.harrison@email.com. My father's personal email. I closed the folder, the heavy leather cover slapping against the desk. "It is perfect, Valerie," I said, my voice echoing slightly in the quiet office. "Have you prepared the secondary documents?" Valerie nodded, opening her desk drawer and pulling out a second, thinner folder. "This contains the official internal audit of the joint credit card account they drained over the last 2 years. Every spa treatment, every wine tasting, every luxury purchase is itemized, highlighted, and cross-referenced with the timeline of Brandon's supposed business ventures. It completely dismantles the narrative that he is a self-made entrepreneur." I took both folders, feeling their weight in my hands. This was not just paper. This was freedom. This was the key to unlocking the prison I had lived in since childhood. "Thank you, Valerie," I said, looking my chief financial officer in the eye. "You have no idea what this means to me." Valerie smiled, a sharp, predatory grin. "Just promise me one thing, Clara. When you drop that evidence on the table tonight, make sure you watch their faces when they realize they brought a knife to a drone strike." I left the office and drove to my house in the suburbs. It was a modest 4-bedroom home, comfortable but unassuming. My parents had always turned their noses up at it, wondering why I did not rent a flashy apartment downtown like Brandon. They never understood the value of quiet stability. I walked into my bedroom and opened the closet. Tonight was not about looking flashy. It was about projecting absolute, untouchable authority. I bypassed the evening gowns and pulled out a tailored, charcoal gray suit. It was sharp, unforgiving, and screamed corporate power. I paired the suit with a simple silk blouse and classic leather pumps. I pulled my hair back into a sleek, severe style, stripping away any softness. When I looked in the full-length mirror, the exhausted widow was entirely gone. The woman staring back at me was a chief executive officer about to execute a hostile takeover of her own family. I checked my watch. It was 6:30. The rehearsal dinner started at 7. The venue was an upscale steakhouse downtown, known for its exorbitant prices and exclusive clientele. It was exactly the type of place my parents chose to impress Nia's wealthy family. I grabbed the 2 folders from my large bed. The thick black dossier contained the federal fraud evidence. The thinner blue folder contained the credit card audit exposing Brandon's fake lifestyle. I slid them both into a sleek leather briefcase, grabbed my car keys, and locked the front door behind me. Sliding into the driver's seat, my phone buzzed with a message from Nia. The text read, "We are seated in the private dining room. Your parents are bragging to my father about Brandon's business acumen. The stage is set. Bring the fire." I put the car in gear and pulled out of the driveway, heading toward the bright city lights, to finish this war forever tonight. The drive downtown was a blur of bright neon lights and steady rain. I pulled my sensible sedan into the valet lane of the Prime Cut Steakhouse, wedging it between a Mercedes and a Porsche. The valet attendant handed me a ticket, glancing briefly at my modest vehicle. I grabbed my leather briefcase from the passenger seat, gripping the handle tightly. The heavy wooden doors of the restaurant swung open, instantly engulfing me in the rich scent of seared Wagyu beef, expensive bourbon, and old money. The hostess station was flanked by towering floral arrangements that undoubtedly cost more than my first car. I gave the hostess the name for the private reservation. She offered a polished smile and gestured down a long, dimly lit hallway lined with vintage wine cellars. I walked at a measured pace, my heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. Every step felt like a drumbeat signaling the end of an era. As I neared the frosted glass doors of the private Bordeaux room, I saw 2 familiar figures lurking in the alcove just outside the entrance. My mother, Susan, was draped in a dark emerald evening gown that practically screamed desperation. Beside her stood my father, Richard, wearing a rented tuxedo that fit a bit too snugly around his waist. They were waiting for me. They had positioned themselves like sentries to intercept me before I could make contact with the rest of the party. I did not slow down. I walked directly toward them, my face an unreadable mask. Susan spotted me first. Her eyes widened slightly at the sight of my severe corporate attire, a sharp departure from the exhausted, unassuming wardrobe she was accustomed to seeing me wear. She stepped directly into my path to block my access to the doors. "Clara!" she hissed, grabbing my elbow with surprisingly strong fingers. "You are late. And what on earth are you wearing? You look like you are going to a corporate board meeting." I calmly reached down and peeled her fingers off my jacket one by one. "I dress for the occasion, Susan," I replied evenly. "Tonight is strictly business." Richard stepped forward, puffing out his chest in an attempt to loom over me. "Drop the attitude immediately," he commanded, his voice a low, threatening rumble, meant only for my ears. "You are already on thin ice after the stunt you pulled at the hospital this morning. We managed to smooth things over with Nia's family, but you have put us in a very difficult position. Brandon is under an immense amount of stress." I stared at him, marveling at his sheer audacity. He had committed federal wire fraud using my social security number just 12 hours ago, yet he stood here demanding my obedience. The loan application they submitted was likely still pending in their minds, but the immediate cash flow for tonight was clearly an issue. "That brings us to why we needed to speak with you before you go inside," Susan interjected, glancing nervously toward the frosted glass doors. "The floral vendor and the caterer are demanding their final payments tonight. Because you selfishly locked the family accounts, the funds we set aside are temporarily unavailable. We are not going to let you ruin your brother's big day over a petty grudge. We have calculated the remaining balance. We need a mandatory family contribution from you tonight." I raised an eyebrow, genuinely amused by their delusion. A mandatory contribution. And exactly how much is this mandatory contribution? $10,000, Richard stated, not blinking. "We need $10,000 wired to my account before the appetizers are served. Consider it a late wedding gift. If you refuse, we will tell Nia's father that you are experiencing a severe mental health episode and have you escorted out of the restaurant by security. You will be dead to us. You will never see Brandon again." I let the silence hang between us, letting them marinate in their own toxic demands. They were literally trying to extort $10,000 from a woman whose child was recovering from open heart surgery, threatening social humiliation as their leverage. They truly believed I was terrified of being ostracized. They thought the threat of losing this family was a weapon. They did not realize it was an absolute blessing. I tightened my grip on the handle of my leather briefcase. Inside were the printed documents detailing their $50,000 loan fraud and the exhaustive audit of their lavish spending on my dime. I looked at my mother, then at my father. $10,000, I repeated softly, making sure to sound hesitant, exactly the way they expected me to sound when I was crumbling under their pressure. "You need it right now." "Yes, right now." Susan snapped, her eyes gleaming with the anticipation of victory. "Transfer it on your phone. Then you can go inside, sit quietly at the back of the table, and try not to embarrass us." I offered them a small, tight smile. "I am not transferring anything in a dark hallway," I said, stepping gracefully around my mother. "We are family. Families discuss financial matters together. Let us go inside, sit down with Brandon and Nia, and we will settle every single debt tonight. I promise you, Richard, by the time dessert is served, everyone in that room will know exactly who is paying for this wedding." Before they could protest or grab my arm again, I pushed open the heavy frosted glass doors of the Bordeaux room. The loud chatter of 30 well-dressed guests instantly washed over me. Crystal glasses clinked, and soft jazz played from concealed speakers. At the head of the long, polished mahogany table sat Brandon, laughing loudly while holding a glass of expensive champagne. Next to him sat Nia, looking breathtaking in a sleek white evening gown. Our eyes met across the room. She offered a barely perceptible nod. The final trap was set. I stepped fully into the Bordeaux room, letting the heavy frosted glass doors swing shut behind me. Almost immediately, they were pushed open again as my parents scrambled into the room, their faces flushed, trying desperately to compose themselves. They plastered on wide, artificial smiles, waving to the guests as if the vicious extortion attempt in the hallway had never happened. I ignored them, keeping my focus locked on the head of the table. Brandon was mid-laugh when he finally noticed me. The sound died in his throat. His smug, entitled expression vanished, replaced instantly by the panicked look of a child caught stealing. He quickly set his champagne flute down on the mahogany table, his eyes darting frantically between me and our parents, who were now hurrying to intercept me before I reached the prominent section. He was wearing the custom-tailored tuxedo that Nia's father had been forced to pay for that morning. He looked absolutely terrified. "Clara," Nia called out, her voice clear and commanding, effortlessly slicing through the ambient noise of the private dining room. She stood up, her sleek white evening gown catching the dim lighting. "We are so glad you could make it. Please come sit up here with us. We saved a seat specifically for you." I saw my mother freeze in her tracks. The seating arrangement was a sacred hierarchy to Susan. The head of the table was reserved exclusively for the wealthy, the important, and the successful. She had undoubtedly planned to banish me to the far corner near the kitchen doors, out of sight and out of mind. The idea of me sitting next to the prominent law firm partner and the senior financial auditor was her worst nightmare. I walked confidently toward the head of the table, my leather pumps sinking into the plush carpet. Brandon stood up slowly, forced by social etiquette to greet his sister in front of his future in-laws. "Hello, Clara," he mumbled, his voice tight. "You look very formal tonight." "I dress for the occasion, Brandon," I replied, echoing the exact phrase I had used on our mother. "And tonight is incredibly important." Naya gestured to the distinguished, silver-haired man sitting to her right. "Clara, I would like you to officially meet my father, Marcus. He has been looking forward to meeting the elusive sister all evening." Marcus stood, extending a firm, manicured hand. "It is a pleasure, Clara. Your parents have told us quite a bit about you." He glanced at my charcoal gray corporate suit, a slight frown touching his brow. "Though I must admit, I expected someone a bit more fragile. Your mother mentioned you were taking some time off from a clerical job to manage some personal stress. You look like you just stepped out of a boardroom." I shook his hand firmly, meeting his gaze with absolute confidence. "I am afraid my mother has a habit of downplaying my professional life, Marcus. I actually run a health technology software firm. We specialize in pediatric data infrastructure." "I just came from the office." Marcus raised an appreciative eyebrow, shooting a quick, confused look toward my parents, who had finally reached the table and were hovering awkwardly behind my chair. "Is that so?" Marcus said, his interest visibly piqued. "A software firm. That is quite a leap from clerical work. We will have to discuss that over dinner. I handle corporate acquisitions and mergers for my firm." "I would love nothing more," I said, taking the designated seat next to him. I placed my heavy leather briefcase directly onto the empty chair beside me, making sure it was in full view of Brandon and my parents. The briefcase landed with a solid, definitive thud. Brandon's eyes instantly dropped to the leather bag, and I watched his throat move as he swallowed hard. He knew I never carried a briefcase to family events. He knew exactly what kind of documents I dealt with on a daily basis. My parents practically shoved their way into the adjacent seats, desperate to run interference. Susan leaned across the table, offering Marcus a shrill, nervous laugh. "Oh, Clara is just exaggerating her little data entry project, Marcus. You know how it is. She is working from home right now because of her daughter. Speaking of which, Clara, how is poor little Lily doing? It is so tragic that you had to leave her side tonight." The sheer manipulation of her statement was masterful. She was attempting to publicly shame me for leaving my recovering child, completely ignoring the fact that she had demanded $10,000 to allow me into the room. I did not flinch. I did not get angry. I simply looked at her and spoke in a clear, carrying voice. "Lily is doing wonderfully, Susan. Her open-heart surgery was a complete success. It is a shame you and Richard could not find the time to visit the pediatric intensive care unit this week. But I understand you were incredibly busy selecting the wine pairings for tonight. A sudden, uncomfortable silence fell over the immediate section of the table. Marcus stopped buttering his dinner roll. Nia took a slow, calculated sip of her water, watching the exchange with the sharp eyes of an auditor, finding a massive discrepancy. Brandon turned a pale, sickly shade of gray. He looked at my father silently, begging him to fix the situation. Richard cleared his throat loudly, his face turning a deep crimson. "Well, it has been a hectic week for everyone," he blustered, waving a hand in the air to dismiss the tension. "The most important thing is that we are all here to celebrate Brandon and Nia. Let us focus on the future." I leaned back in my chair, resting my hand gently on the brass clasp of my briefcase. "I completely agree, Richard," I said. "The future is exactly what we need to discuss right now to ensure total absolute clarity." The waitstaff entered the room in a synchronized line, carrying silver trays loaded with the first course. The sudden flurry of culinary activity provided my parents with a brief, desperate reprieve. They practically collapsed into their designated chairs across the mahogany table. Susan immediately grabbed her crystal water goblet, her knuckles turning bone white, taking a long, ungraceful gulp. Richard tugged aggressively at the tight collar of his rented tuxedo, his eyes darting toward the heavy wooden doors as if mentally calculating the physical distance to the nearest exit. Brandon remained absolutely frozen in his seat, staring at my leather briefcase like it was an active explosive device sitting on the adjacent chair. Marcus, blissfully unaware of the intense psychological warfare happening across his own dinner table, leaned toward me. He was a man accustomed to commanding corporate boardrooms and assessing financial value. He was clearly intrigued by the glaring discrepancy between the pathetic narrative he had been sold and the sharp, confident woman sitting beside him. So Clara, Marcus began, his voice easily cutting through the clatter of expensive silverware. "Your mother mentioned you took a step back from the corporate world to focus on family matters. But you just mentioned a health technology firm. Are you a mid-level manager there? Or perhaps an independent consultant?" I smiled warmly, picking up my crisp linen napkin and unfolding it deliberately across my lap. "Neither, Marcus. I am the founder and the chief executive officer. I built the entire digital infrastructure from the ground up 7 years ago. We currently handle secure pediatric data for over 40 major hospitals across the Pacific Northwest. The company valuation recently surpassed $50 million. The sound of Susan violently choking on her water echoed loudly across the quiet dining room. She coughed aggressively, her face turning a deep, unnatural shade of purple, while Richard frantically patted her bare back. Several guests at the far end of the table stopped talking, turning to stare at the commotion. Marcus stopped with his silver fork hovering halfway to his mouth. He looked directly at me, genuine astonishment completely replacing his polite conversational interest. 50 million. And you are the sole founder. That is incredibly impressive, Clara. Why on earth would your parents deliberately describe you as a struggling clerical worker taking a mental health break? I let my cold gaze slowly travel across the floral centerpieces, locking eyes with my mother as she continued to gasp for air. "I suppose it is extremely difficult for them to publicly accept my financial success, Marcus. Especially when it directly contradicts the meticulous fictional story they have carefully curated about Brandon being the sole financial pillar of the Harrison family." Brandon visibly flinched. He looked like he desperately wanted to slide under the heavy mahogany table and disappear directly into the plush carpet. Nia placed a supportive, perfectly manicured hand on Brandon's forearm, though I could see her grip was painfully tight. "Oh, Brandon is just very modest," Nia said, her tone dripping with a sugary sweetness that I knew was pure, calculated poison. "He rarely talks about the intricate operational details of his logistics company. In fact, he was just telling me earlier today that his latest commercial venture required a massive influx of capital. Is that right, darling?" Brandon stammered heavily, a thin, shiny sheen of sweat breaking out on his forehead under the warm restaurant lighting. "Well, you know exactly how it is in the aggressive startup phase. Operational cash flow is always incredibly tight. It requires significant initial investment to scale properly. I leaned forward, resting my forearms firmly on the polished wood table. Significant investment. That is a truly fascinating way to phrase it, Brandon. Tell me, does this massive influx of capital involve a fictitious executive assistant from Apex Logistics earning exactly $45,000 a year? The remaining color drained entirely from Brandon's face, leaving him looking like a ghost in a custom-tailored tuxedo. He knew the exact name of the fake company. He knew exactly what specific federal document I was referencing. Richard slammed his heavy fist down on the table, causing the crystal wine glasses to rattle violently against the wood. The surrounding guests immediately turned their heads, their cheerful conversations halting instantly at the sudden aggressive display. Clara. That is absolutely enough. Richard barked, his voice laced with absolute frantic panic. This is neither the proper time nor the correct place to discuss these complex, sensitive business matters. We are all here to enjoy an expensive meal and celebrate. I did not break my intense eye contact with my brother. Oh, I strongly disagree, Richard. I think this is the absolutely perfect time. After all, you purposely cornered me in a dark hallway just 10 minutes ago, demanding a mandatory contribution of $10,000. You explicitly stated that if I did not wire the money immediately, the caterer and the floral vendor would completely cancel this event. I slowly turned to look at Marcus, whose polite expression had rapidly hardened into a rigid mask of cold, furious calculation. Marcus, did Richard or Susan inform you that they completely lacked the liquid funds to pay for tonight? Marcus slowly and deliberately put down his silver fork. He turned his piercing executive gaze toward my sweating father. Richard. We had a very clear contractual agreement regarding this wedding. My family happily covered the luxury venue, the bridal party attire, and the extensive tropical honeymoon. You explicitly insisted on handling the rehearsal dinner and the floral arrangements to prove your financial standing and independence. Are you honestly telling me you cannot afford to pay the bill for this single room tonight? Richard opened his mouth, but absolutely no sound came out. He looked exactly like a fish suffocating on dry land. Susan desperately attempted to salvage the rapidly escalating catastrophe. Marcus, please, you must understand it is just a minor temporary liquidity issue, she stammered, waving her hands frantically in the air. Brandon's substantial assets are temporarily tied up in his new logistics venture. We just needed a small short-term loan from Clara to cover the overnight vendor fees. Clara is just being terribly uncooperative because she is intensely jealous of her brother's massive success. She has always been bitterly jealous of him since childhood. I reached over to the empty chair and confidently popped the dual brass clasps of my leather briefcase. The sharp metallic click sounded exactly like gunshots in the sudden deafening silence of the private room. I am not jealous, Susan. I am simply utterly exhausted by the relentless illegal financial parasitism. I pulled out the thinner blue folder first, the one containing the exhaustive verified internal audit of their fraudulent spending. I placed it squarely on the table directly in front of me. Brandon does not have a successful logistics venture, Marcus. He does not have tied-up commercial assets. He does not actually have a company at all. I flipped open the heavy blue folder, revealing the neatly highlighted pages of bank statements. For the past 2 years, Brandon has been completely funding his luxury fake lifestyle using a joint credit line that I established when I was 18 years old. I foolishly trusted my parents to manage it. Instead, they secretly handed the unlimited access directly to Brandon. Every custom suit, every expensive steak dinner, every single expensive bottle of champagne he has casually purchased to impress your daughter has been paid for using my stolen corporate credit. Nia gasped loudly, pressing a delicate hand to her chest in a theatrical display of shock that we had rehearsed perfectly the night before. Brandon, is this actually true? She demanded, her voice echoing sharply off the wood-paneled walls. Have you been lying to my face this entire time? Have you been maliciously stealing from your own sister? Brandon opened his mouth, attempting to defend his pathetic actions, but the irrefutable evidence was sitting right there in undeniable highlighted black and white. Marcus reached aggressively across the table, his face a tight mask of absolute outrage, and pulled the blue folder forcefully toward himself. I watched silently as Marcus scanned the first detailed page. His eyes widened significantly as he read the itemized list of luxury retail purchases. "This is completely unbelievable," Marcus muttered, his voice trembling with sheer anger. "You sat directly in my corporate office and showed me a detailed portfolio of investments. You confidently claimed you were generating millions in annual revenue." I looked at Brandon, feeling a cold, dark, hollow satisfaction settling in my chest. "He showed you expertly forged documents, Marcus. It is a long-standing family specialty, and stealing my credit was just the minor appetizer." I reached back into my open briefcase and pulled out the thick black leather folder containing the federal fraud evidence. "The main course I brought tonight is significantly worse." I slid the heavy black dossier across the polished mahogany directly into Marcus's waiting hands. He did not hesitate. He flipped open the thick leather cover, his eyes immediately locking onto the official logo of the subprime federal lender. The room was now so quiet, you could hear the rain lashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows. I kept my voice perfectly level, ensuring every single guest at that long table heard my next words. "Just 12 hours ago, while my daughter was recovering from open-heart surgery, my parents and my brother walked into a coffee shop 3 blocks from the pediatric hospital. They used a prepaid cellular device and my stolen Social Security number to apply for a $50,000 commercial loan. They forged tax documents. They fabricated an employment history. They committed textbook federal wire fraud to pay for the floral arrangements and the catering bill for this exact room." Richard lunged forward across the table, knocking over a crystal water pitcher. It shattered instantly, sending water and glass cascading across the white linen tablecloth. "You absolute liar!" he roared, his face a mask of primal panic. "Give me that folder immediately, Marcus. These are stolen private family documents, and she has clearly doctored them to ruin her brother's wedding." Marcus did not flinch. He simply moved the folder out of Richard's reach, his eyes scanning the digital signature logs. He was a senior partner at a major law firm. He knew exactly what a legitimate forensic audit looked like. "Do not attempt to touch me, Richard," Marcus warned, his voice dropping to a dangerous, icy register. "And do not insult my intelligence. I am looking at a certified internet protocol trace. I am looking at a forged employment verification letter. And I am looking at the secondary authentication log." Marcus paused, his eyes narrowing as he read the final line on the page. He looked up, directing his lethal gaze at my father. "Why is your personal email address listed as the recovery contact for a fraudulent federal loan application submitted in your daughter's name?" Susan let out a high-pitched wail, burying her face in her hands. It was the theatrical cry of a woman who finally realized her carefully constructed social empire was burning to the ground. She turned her desperate, tear-streaked face toward Nia's mother, Eleanor, who sat frozen on the other side of Marcus. "Eleanor, please," Susan begged, her voice trembling. "You know how stressful weddings are. We were simply trying to ensure Brandon had the beautiful celebration he deserved. Clara is a multimillionaire. She has more money than she could ever spend. We just wanted to borrow a tiny fraction of it to keep up appearances for your lovely family. We were going to pay her back." Eleanor stared at my mother as if she were looking at a venomous insect. "You committed federal identity theft to buy expensive centerpieces," Eleanor stated, her voice dripping with aristocratic disgust. "You endangered your own daughter's legal standing and abandoned a sick child to pay for imported orchids. You people are absolutely repulsive." Brandon finally broke. The golden child facade completely shattered under the crushing weight of public humiliation. He pushed his chair back violently, standing up and pointing an accusing finger directly at our parents. "This was your brilliant idea," Brandon shouted, his voice cracking with hysteria. "You told me it was completely foolproof. You said Clara was too distracted by the hospital to notice the credit inquiry. You promised me the money would be in the account by tonight so I would not look like a failure in front of Marcus." I watched him unravel with cold detachment. For 31 years, Brandon had been elevated as the absolute pinnacle of success in our household. Every mistake he made was excused. Every failure was blamed on someone else. Now, with the entire room watching, he was instinctively throwing our parents directly under the bus to save himself. It was a spectacular display of cowardice. Richard stood up, his rented tuxedo jacket straining against his chest. "Shut your mouth, Brandon," he commanded, his voice shaking with a mixture of rage and terror. "Do not say another word in front of these people." "These people," Marcus repeated, slowly closing the black dossier. "These people were about to welcome you into our family. I was about to walk my only daughter down the aisle and hand her over to a man who steals from his own sister to buy custom-tailored suits." Marcus turned to Nia, who was still playing her part, flawlessly, tears welling in her eyes. "Nia, gather your things. We are leaving immediately. The wedding is permanently cancelled." Nia stood up, clutching her small evening bag. "How could you do this to me, Brandon?" she cried out, her voice echoing perfectly in the silent room. "You promised me a life built on trust. You are nothing but a criminal." She turned and practically ran toward the heavy frosted glass doors, a brilliant performance that deserved an Academy Award. Eleanor stood up gracefully, adjusting her silk shawl. She did not even look at Susan as she walked past. Marcus remained at the table for a brief moment longer. He picked up both the blue folder and the black dossier, tucking them firmly under his arm. "I am taking these files directly to my personal contacts at the Federal Bureau of Investigation in the morning," Marcus announced, looking directly at my father. "Do not bother trying to contact my daughter. Do not attempt to contact my firm. If any of you come within 50 feet of my family ever again, I will personally ensure you spend the next 10 years in a federal penitentiary." Marcus gave me a single respectful nod, acknowledging the tactical execution of the ambush before turning and following his wife out of the room. The heavy doors swung shut, sealing the three of them inside their own self-made disaster. The surrounding guests, most of whom were extended family and former business associates of my parents, sat in stunned silence. The absolute devastation was complete. Susan slumped down in her chair, her emerald gown looking pathetic and wrinkled. She stared blankly at the shattered glass and spilled water on the tablecloth. Richard stood frozen, staring at the closed doors, as if waiting for Marcus to return and say it was all a joke. Brandon sank back into his chair, burying his head in his arms and sobbing loudly. The golden child was dead. The wealthy in-laws were gone. The fake empire was entirely reduced to ash. I slowly stood up, smoothing the front of my charcoal gray suit. I picked up my empty leather briefcase, feeling incredibly light. I looked at the three of them, feeling absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness. Just the quiet, peaceful emptiness of a severed chain. "You wanted a mandatory contribution tonight?" I said softly, my voice carrying clearly across the ruined table. "I believe I have paid my debt in full. I will be sending the final legal separation documents to your house by courier tomorrow. Do not contact me again." I turned my back on them and walked out of the Bordeaux room. As I stepped out of the steakhouse and into the cool, rainy Seattle night, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Nia. The message read, "Impeccable execution. Meet me at the hotel bar across the street. I owe you a drink." I tucked the phone back into my pocket and stepped confidently into the driving Seattle rain. My charcoal gray suit absorbed the damp chill, but I felt absolutely invincible. I crossed the slick asphalt of the busy avenue, the bright neon lights of the steakhouse bleeding into the dark puddles beneath my feet. The Grand Hotel stood directly across the street, an imposing monolith of polished granite and warm gold lighting. I pushed through the heavy revolving glass doors, leaving the miserable weather and the toxic remnants of my bloodline entirely behind me. The hotel lobby lounge was a sprawling cavern of ambient amber light, low jazz music, and quiet luxury. I spotted Nia immediately. She was seated in a high-backed leather booth near the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, providing a perfect vantage point of the street outside. Her theatrical tears were completely gone. The distressed fiancé act had vanished, replaced by the sharp, calculating demeanor of a senior financial auditor. Sitting on the low mahogany table in front of her were two perfectly mixed martinis. I slid into the booth opposite her, picking up my glass. "That was a masterclass in psychological warfare," I said, tapping my rim against hers. Marcus deserves an award for that performance. Nia smiled, taking a slow, satisfied sip. My father has been waiting to execute that maneuver since I showed him the initial credit discrepancies 3 weeks ago. He despises parasites. But we need to stay vigilant, Clara. I just received a text from my former wedding planner. The steakhouse management did not waste any time. Since my father officially pulled all funding and your family cannot produce a valid credit card, they are currently being evicted from the premises. I turned my head looking through the massive rain-streaked windows of the hotel lounge. Directly across the street, a chaotic scene was rapidly unfolding on the brightly lit sidewalk. The general manager of the Prime Cut Steakhouse stood on the curb alongside two broad-shouldered security guards. Richard, Susan, and Brandon were being physically corralled out of the restaurant and shoved into the pouring rain. They were completely trapped. They had no money to pay the valet for their car, and they were stranded in their ruined formal wear. Suddenly, Susan stopped pacing the wet pavement. She whipped her head around, scanning the street, her eyes locked directly onto the brightly lit windows of the Grand Hotel lounge. Even through the torrential rain in the distance, I could see her face contort into a mask of absolute unhinged rage. She pointed a trembling manicured finger directly at the glass. "They are coming," Nia noted calmly, setting her martini down. "Do you want me to alert hotel security?" "No," I replied, keeping my eyes locked on my mother, as the three of them jaywalked recklessly across the busy avenue, dodging honking cars and screeching tires. "Let them come. They need to hit absolute rock bottom tonight." Seconds later, the revolving doors of the Grand Hotel spun violently. Richard, Susan, and Brandon burst into the pristine lobby. They were soaked to the bone, disheveled, and radiating pure, desperate hostility. The quiet, refined elegance of the lounge shattered instantly. Susan led the charge, her ruined emerald evening gown dripping a trail of dirty rainwater onto the spotless marble floor. She no longer cared about her precious social decorum. She only cared about inflicting public pain. She stomped toward our leather booth and unleashed a guttural, piercing scream. "You absolute monster!" Susan shrieked, her voice echoing violently off the high, gold-leafed ceiling. The live jazz pianist stopped playing immediately. Over 50 wealthy hotel patrons turned their heads in unison, their quiet conversations dying in their throats. Susan spun around, dramatically gesturing toward me for the entire lobby to see. "Look at her, everyone!" Susan yelled, her voice cracking with hysterical venom. "Look at the vicious sociopath who just ruined her own brother's life out of pure, spiteful jealousy. She is a fraud." I did not stand up. I did not flinch. I remained perfectly still, resting my forearms on the table. Susan paced like a rabid animal, weaponizing every single insecurity she had ever tried to plant in my head. "She is a terrible, neglectful mother," Susan screamed to the stunned audience of strangers. "Her infant daughter is lying in a hospital bed, recovering from heart surgery right now, and this cold, unfeeling witch abandoned her just so she could orchestrate a petty revenge plot over money. She is a soulless corporate drone who cannot keep a husband, so she decided to destroy her brother's happiness instead. She is rotten to her absolute core." Brandon stood behind her, shivering violently in his wet tuxedo, looking absolutely pathetic. Richard stepped forward, puffing out his chest, attempting to project authority, despite looking like a drowned rat. "I will sue you for everything you own!" "Clara," Richard bellowed, pointing a thick, shaking finger at my face. "You planted those fabricated documents. You orchestrated this entire setup to defame us. I will have my lawyers strip your company down to the studs by Friday morning." The hotel security team was already converging. 4 large men in dark tailored suits were moving rapidly across the lobby, communicating quietly into their earpieces. I let Susan take one final gasping breath as she prepared to hurl another barrage of fabricated insults. "Are you quite finished, Susan?" I asked. I did not yell. I spoke in the calm, measured carrying voice of a chief executive officer addressing a hostile boardroom. My tone sliced through her hysteria like a scalpel. I slowly stood up, smoothing the front of my charcoal jacket. I turned to the captivated audience of wealthy hotel patrons who were watching the spectacle with wide eyes. I sincerely apologize for the massive disturbance this evening, I said, clearly projecting my voice across the silent room. My parents recently discovered that federal wire fraud is a felony, and they are struggling to process the reality of their impending indictments. A collective gasp rippled through the lobby. Several patrons literally stepped backward, pulling their coats tighter around themselves, looking at my family as if they were carrying a highly contagious disease. The public insult had backfired spectacularly. Susan had demanded an audience, and I had just handed them the absolute truth. The head of hotel security reached our table, his face a mask of professional irritation. "Ma'am," he said, addressing Susan directly. "You are dripping water on the marble, you are screaming obscenities, and you are disturbing our guests. You need to vacate the premises immediately. We are not leaving until she gives us the money to get our car." Richard demanded, his voice suddenly losing its booming confidence as the 4 security guards surrounded them. "She owes us." I looked at the head of security. "I have absolutely no relation to these people," I stated coldly. "They are attempting to extort me. Please remove them." The security guards moved in with brutal efficiency. They did not ask politely a second time. They grabbed Richard and Brandon by their wet lapels and physically marched them toward the exit. Susan clawed and thrashed, screaming my name over and over again, until the heavy revolving doors swallowed her screams, spitting her back out into the freezing, relentless Seattle rain. I sat back down in the leather booth and picked up my martini. Nia raised her glass once more, a look of profound respect on her face. To rock bottom, she toasted softly. To the absolute bottom, I agreed, taking a drink. The war was officially over. Now it was time to salt the earth. I set my empty martini glass on the polished mahogany table, the sharp clink echoing in the quiet lounge. Nia and I sat in comfortable silence for a few more minutes, watching the heavy Seattle rain wash the streets clean. We had executed the ambush flawlessly, but my work was far from finished. The public humiliation at the rehearsal dinner was merely the theatrical opening act. It was a surgical strike designed to separate them from their wealthy targets. Now came the systemic dismantling of their actual lives. I bid Nia good night, thanking her again for her brilliant performance and promising to keep her updated on the legal fallout. I walked out of the Grand Hotel and took a secure ride-share back to the pediatric hospital, slipping quietly into Lily's room just past midnight. My mother-in-law was asleep in the vinyl chair in the corner, a warm blanket draped over her shoulders. Lily was resting peacefully in her hospital bed, her small chest rising and falling in a steady, reassuring rhythm. The heart monitor beeped in a slow, healthy cadence. I sat in the dark at the small bedside table, opening my laptop. The blue glare illuminated my face as I prepared the first tactical strike. My parents had spent their entire adult lives meticulously cultivating an image of impenetrable upper-middle-class wealth. They hosted lavish holiday parties, they sat on local charity boards, and they constantly bragged about Brandon's fictional corporate success to anyone who would listen. Their social standing was their absolute oxygen. I was about to completely suffocate them. I opened a draft email I had prepared 3 days ago with my legal team. The recipient list was extensive and intentionally devastating. It included every single aunt, uncle, and cousin in the Harrison family tree. It included the president of my mother's exclusive garden club. It included my father's regular golf partners from the country club. It was a carefully curated audience of the exact people they spent their entire lives trying to impress and manipulate. I attached a single heavily redacted document to the email. It was a digital copy of the blue folder I had dropped on the dinner table earlier that evening. It was the official verified internal audit of the joint credit line they had hijacked. I began to type, keeping my tone perfectly sterile, corporate, and legally compliant. To our extended family and friends, I wrote, "Due to recent unfortunate events, I feel it is strictly necessary to clarify my immediate separation from Richard Susan and Brandon Harrison. For the past 2 years, I have unknowingly served as the sole financial sponsor for Brandon's lifestyle and my parents' luxury expenses. Attached is the certified audit of a joint credit account that was drained without my knowledge or consent." I highlighted the final staggering sum in bold text, $35,000. I did not just drop the number, I weaponized the itemized data. I detailed the absolute absurdity of their spending habits. I listed the $4,000 spent on custom-tailored suits for a man who did not have a legitimate job. I exposed the $12,000 blown on exclusive bottle service at downtown nightclubs, all charged under the guise of fictitious client acquisition meetings for Brandon's non-existent logistics firm. I highlighted the $8,000 my mother had quietly siphoned off for a luxury spa retreat in Sedona, which she had brazenly claimed to the family was a gift from a wealthy anonymous benefactor. The most sickening revelation I included was a simple timestamp correlation. I pointed out a specific transaction for a $600 pair of designer sunglasses purchased by Brandon. I noted that the transaction occurred on the exact same afternoon Lily was rushed to the emergency room in heart failure. It was all there in undeniable black and white. Every pathetic, desperate attempt to buy a lifestyle they could not afford, financed entirely by the daughter they openly despised. The $35,000 debt was not just a financial liability. It was a towering monument to their profound vanity and moral bankruptcy. I took a deep breath, looked at my sleeping daughter, and hit send. The electronic swoosh of the outgoing message felt like a physical chain snapping off my chest. The first bomb was officially in the air. By sunrise, their entire social network would know they were broke, deceitful parasites. The fallout was completely instantaneous. At exactly 7 in the morning, my phone began to vibrate violently against the hard plastic of the hospital tray table. I picked it up, watching the notifications flood the screen in a rapid wave. The extended family group chat, which I had permanently muted years ago, was exploding. My Aunt Carol, a notoriously gossipy woman who treated family drama like an Olympic sport, was the first to break the stunned silence. She replied to the entire email chain with a single, devastating sentence. "Susan? Is this why you begged to borrow $2,000 from us for your property taxes last month?" That single message shattered the dam. The notifications cascaded down my screen like a waterfall. Uncle David replied next, his text dripping with furious betrayal. "Richard, you looked me in the eye at Thanksgiving and told me Clara was struggling financially and that you were generously supporting her. You lied to my face to cover up your son's theft." Cousins were demanding explanations. The president of the garden club quietly removed Susan from the administrative mailing list. The carefully constructed facade of the Harrison family empire was collapsing in real time, block by block, right before my eyes. Then came the incoming phone calls. Richard tried to call me 6 times in a span of 4 minutes. I rejected every single one, sending them directly to a secure voicemail box that my legal team would review later for harassment evidence. He was panicking. He realized that the rehearsal dinner explosion was not an isolated incident of anger. He realized I was actively and methodically salting the earth. At 8 o'clock, I left the hospital room to get a black coffee from the cafeteria. While standing in line, I received a text message from an unknown, unlisted number. I knew exactly who it was. The message read, "You vindictive little brat. You are destroying our entire reputation over $35,000. We are your family. You make that much money in a single month at your company. You are completely dead to us." I typed my reply with steady, unforgiving fingers. "A reputation built on stolen money is not a reputation, Susan. It is a delusion, and you are absolutely correct. I do make that much in a month, but you will never see a single penny of it ever again. Do not ever contact me." I blocked the number permanently. The first bomb had detonated with absolute precision, obliterating their social standing and exposing their financial rot to the world. But the $35,000 credit card debt was just a civil matter. It was deeply embarrassing, but it was not enough to put them in a courtroom. It was simply the appetizer before the main course. I walked back up to the pediatric floor, a hot coffee in my hand and a cold, hyper-focused determination in my chest. The social execution was complete. Now it was time to address the federal crimes. It was time for the $50,000 loan fraud to come into the unforgiving light of day. I pulled out my phone and dialed the direct line for my lead corporate attorney. The real war was about to begin. Gregory answered on the second ring, his sharp voice instantly cutting through the quiet hum of the hospital corridor. I did not bother with pleasantries. The social demolition is entirely complete, Gregory Weiss stated, gripping my coffee cup. They have been publicly exposed and evicted from the venue. It is time to drop the hammer. I want the black dossier submitted to the federal authorities immediately. I want zero hesitation and absolutely no mercy. I could hear the smile in Gregory's voice as he shuffled thick paper files on his massive oak desk. I have been waiting for this exact phone call all morning, Clara. I have the entire evidence package digitized, encrypted, and perfectly formatted. We are filing this under Title 18 United States Code Section 1343 for federal wire fraud and Section 1028 for aggravated identity theft. The sheer volume of undeniable evidence your cybersecurity team compiled is staggering. I have a direct contact at the Federal Bureau of Investigation Seattle Field Office in the Cybercrimes Division. Special Agent Miller. He handles high-value corporate and financial fraud. I am transmitting the encrypted file to his secure server right now. Explain the exact sequence of events to me? I instructed pacing the length of the sterile hallway outside my daughter's room. I needed to know the precise timeline of their destruction. I wanted to mentally map every single moment of panic they were about to experience. First, Gregory explained, his tone shifting into pure lethal legal strategy. Agent Miller will review the Internet Protocol trace and the forged tax documents. Because your father utilized his own personal email address as the secondary authentication method, it provides immediate probable cause. The Bureau does not need to waste months building a flimsy circumstantial case. Your family effectively wrapped a signed confession. Within the next 24 hours, the Bureau will issue a formal federal subpoena to the prepaid cellular provider to pull the exact geographical location data of the burner phone used in the coffee shop. They will also subpoena the subprime lender to secure the original application files into the chain of custody. And what about the lender, I asked. We cannot let that $50,000 loan simply sit in a pending status. We need the bank to trigger their own internal security alarms. Already handled, Gregory confirmed smoothly. I coordinated with Valerie 10 minutes ago. She just contacted the senior fraud investigator at the subprime lending institution. She provided them with your official sworn affidavit of identity theft and the corresponding police report number. The exact moment they realized they were mere hours away from wiring $50,000 to a fraudulent criminal account. Their internal security protocols will automatically engage. They are legally obligated by federal banking regulations to freeze every single asset connected to the perpetrators. Because your father linked his personal checking account to receive the loan disbursement, the bank will freeze his legitimate funds immediately under suspicion of money laundering and wire fraud. He will not be able to buy a cup of coffee, let alone hire a competent criminal defense attorney. I stopped pacing and leaned against the cold hospital wall. The absolute brilliance of the trap was breathtaking. By trying to steal my credit, they had inadvertently handed the banking system the exact authority needed to financially paralyze them. They were completely severed from their own money. I remembered when I was 16 years old working a minimum wage job, and Richard had demanded I hand over my paychecks so he could manage my savings. He had controlled every single penny I possessed, using money as a weapon of absolute obedience. The poetic justice of him standing at a cash register, his debit card declining, was a deeply satisfying reality. Thank you, Gregory, I said quietly. Let me know the exact moment Special Agent Miller officially opens the criminal file. I ended the call and walked back into the hospital room. The morning light was finally breaking through the heavy gray Seattle clouds, casting a bright, clean glow over Lily's sleeping form. I sat in the vinyl chair, feeling a profound sense of peace. For the first time in my entire life, I was not anxiously anticipating the next crisis my family would manufacture. I was the architect of their consequences. By noon, the secondary shockwaves of my legal strategy began to violently register. I was sitting at the small table in the hospital room reviewing quarterly software reports for my company when my secure corporate voicemail system flagged an incoming message. The system automatically transcribed the audio into text on my screen. It was from Brandon. He was using a courtesy phone in the lobby of a cheap motel, his voice trembling with a pathetic mixture of raw panic and absolute disbelief. "Clara, you have to call me back immediately," the transcription read. "Something is horribly wrong. We tried to use Dad's debit card to pay for a hotel room after we were violently kicked out of the restaurant last night. The card was completely declined. We went to a physical bank branch this morning to withdraw cash, and the teller told us the entire account is locked by the Federal Fraud Department. Dad's retirement savings, his checking account, even the emergency fund. They are all completely frozen. We have literally no money. We slept in the chairs of a motel lobby. You have to fix this, Clara. Tell the bank it was just a misunderstanding, please." I read the panicked words twice, savoring the sheer desperation bleeding through the text. A misunderstanding. They forged a corporate employment verification letter, fabricated 2 years of federal tax returns, and attempted to steal $50,000 in my name, and Brandon was still trying to categorize it as a simple familial misunderstanding. His profound delusion was almost fascinating to witness. He still believed he was the protected golden child. He still believed I would eventually swoop in and save him from the devastating consequences of his own malicious actions. I deleted the voicemail. I did not forward it to my lawyer. I did not respond. Absolute silence was the most terrifying weapon I could wield right now. They were stranded in the city, entirely cut off from their finances, their social circle completely obliterated, and a federal cybercrimes investigation quietly tightening like a hangman's noose around their necks. They had nowhere to run and absolutely no resources to fight back. At 2 in the afternoon, my phone rang again. This time it was Valerie. Her voice was practically vibrating with professional excitement. "Chief," she said quickly, "I just got off the phone with the subprime lender. Their legal department is absolutely furious. They independently verified the forged Apex Logistics documents. They have officially flagged the $50,000 application as a high-tier felony fraud attempt. They are not just freezing your father's accounts. They are actively referring the case to the federal authorities on their end as well. Your father is now facing dual investigations. The bank wants his head on a literal spike." "Excellent work, Valerie," I replied, watching a nurse gently check Lily's surgical dressing. "Keep monitoring the national credit bureaus. I want to know if they attempt to open even a single store credit card in a desperate bid for cash." "They cannot?" Valerie laughed sharply. "We placed a maximum security freeze on your profile, but because their specific names are now permanently tied to a flagged federal fraud application, the credit bureaus have preemptively locked their legitimate social security numbers too. They are entirely blacklisted from the American financial system. They cannot get a small personal loan, they cannot open a new checking account, and they cannot even rent a cheap apartment. They are financial ghosts." I thanked Valerie and closed my laptop. The second bomb had successfully leveled whatever was left of their pathetic empire. The FBI was officially hunting them. The commercial banks had frozen their life savings. The national credit bureaus had permanently exiled them. The meticulous, ruthless execution of my plan was yielding flawless results. But as I sat in the quiet hospital room, I knew my parents would not simply surrender. Cornered animals always lash out. They would attempt one final desperate maneuver to regain control. I simply had to wait for them to make their last fatal mistake. The wait was significantly shorter than I anticipated. At 5 o'clock that evening, my phone illuminated with a text message from Nia. She was sitting in the hospital cafeteria on the ground floor. I kissed my sleeping daughter's forehead and took the elevator down. The cafeteria was nearly empty, filled with the harsh hum of fluorescent lights and the smell of stale hospital food. Nia sat at an isolated corner table, dressed in a sharp beige trench coat, a thick manila envelope resting perfectly centered in front of her. She looked entirely composed, like a predator who had just finished methodically analyzing her prey. I bought 2 black coffees and slid into the plastic booth across from her. Nia did not offer a polite greeting. She pushed the heavy manila envelope directly across the laminate table. My father officially handed the loan documents over to his contacts at the Federal Bureau of Investigation this morning, Nia stated, wrapping her manicured hands around the warm coffee cup. But before I permanently deleted Brandon from my life, I decided to do a deep forensic dive into the business portfolio he presented to my father last month. I wanted to look at it strictly through the lens of a senior auditor, not a trusting fiancé. I opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of glossy, professionally bound financial projections. The cover page proudly displayed the fake corporate logo for Apex Logistics. The sheer production value was undeniably impressive. "What did you find?" I asked, flipping through pages of heavily fabricated profit and loss statements. "I found a textbook psychological profile of pathological denial," Nia replied, leaning forward, her eyes bright with analytical intensity. Fraudsters generally fall into 2 distinct behavioral categories. The first category knows they are criminals stealing money, and they calculate their risks accordingly. The second category is far more dangerous. They genuinely believe they are brilliant entrepreneurs who are merely experiencing temporary financial setbacks. They lie to themselves so effectively that the fiction becomes their absolute reality. Brandon is squarely in the second category. He did not just forge these documents to impress my wealthy family, he forged them to completely convince himself. She pointed a sharp fingernail at a specific line item labeled gross annual revenue. He actually went through the trouble of incorporating a legitimate limited liability company with the state. He opened commercial bank accounts, but instead of generating actual business, he engaged in a pathetic scheme known as equity kiting. He took the cash advances from your stolen corporate credit card and deposited them directly into his business checking account. Then he categorized those stolen funds as incoming client revenue on his tax ledgers. He created fictional invoices for non-existent clients matching the exact dollar amounts of your stolen credit limits. He was essentially laundering your credit into his own fake corporate ecosystem to make it look like a thriving, highly profitable enterprise. I stared at the numbers, a cold disgust washing over me. He burned $35,000 in massive credit card cash advance fees just to pretend he was a chief executive officer. He built a cardboard castle and genuinely thought he was royalty. "Exactly," Nia said, her voice dropping to a surgical, precise whisper. "And when a man like that has his entire fabricated reality violently stripped away in public, his brain cannot process the catastrophic failure. He will double down on the delusion. He will convince himself that the rest of the world is simply failing to understand his unique genius." As if summoned by the sheer force of his own pathetic ego, a loud commotion erupted near the main cafeteria entrance. I turned my head. Brandon was aggressively shoving past a startled hospital volunteer. He looked absolutely and entirely unhinged. The custom-tailored tuxedo from last night was gone, replaced by wrinkled sweatpants and a stained gray hoodie. He had heavy dark bags under his frantic bloodshot eyes. He was wildly scanning the room until his gaze locked onto Nia. He practically sprinted toward our table, completely ignoring my presence. He crashed into the empty chair next to Nia, his hands trembling violently as he reached out to grab her arm. Nia smoothly pulled her arm back, her expression shifting instantly into a mask of pure, freezing disdain. "Nia, thank God I found you," Brandon gasped, his breath smelling stale and sour from a night spent in a motel lobby. "I tracked your location through the old shared calendar app on my phone. You have to listen to me. Last night was a complete catastrophic misunderstanding. Clara deliberately manipulated those documents to make me look incompetent because she is intensely jealous of our relationship." I sat back in my chair, absolutely fascinated by the raw, unfiltered delusion playing out in front of me. He was currently completely homeless. His bank accounts were frozen by federal authorities, and his entire family had been publicly humiliated and excommunicated. Yet his immediate instinct was to attempt to charm the professional auditor who had personally uncovered his federal crimes. "Brandon," Nia said, her tone as cold as liquid nitrogen, "your bank accounts are locked by the federal fraud department. Your $50,000 loan application has been officially flagged for aggravated identity theft. My father handed your internet protocol logs to a federal cybercrimes agent 6 hours ago. There is no misunderstanding. You are a criminal. No, Brandon shouted, slamming his hand on the table, causing our coffee cups to rattle loudly against the laminate. You are not listening to me. The business is completely real. Apex Logistics is a registered corporate entity. I just needed a temporary bridge loan to handle operational overhead. The money from Clara was an undocumented family investment. I am a founder. I am an entrepreneur. I am not a thief. I was going to pay everyone back the exact second my next massive commercial shipping contract cleared. Nia stared at him with the clinical detachment of a scientist observing a dying insect. You have 0 shipping contracts, Brandon. You do not own any commercial trucks. You do not have any active clients. Your gross revenue is entirely comprised of stolen credit card advances from your sister. You are not an entrepreneur. You are a 31-year-old man playing pretend with stolen money. You are a complete mathematical zero. Brandon's face contorted into a mask of absolute paralyzing agony. The unyielding audit facts were finally piercing through the thick, lifelong armor of his denial. He looked frantically at me, his eyes wide and pleading. Clara, please, he begged, his voice cracking into a pathetic, desperate whine. Tell her I am a good businessman. Tell her I just need a little more time. If you just unlock the accounts and withdraw the police report, I can fix everything. I can make the company profitable. I just need one more chance. We are family. You have to protect me. I looked at the man who had happily abandoned my infant daughter to fund his own pathetic vanity. I am protecting my family, Brandon, I said softly, my voice completely devoid of any empathy. That is exactly why you are going to federal prison. 2 large hospital security guards burst through the cafeteria doors, their radios crackling loudly in the quiet room. They spotted Brandon and marched aggressively toward our table. Sir, the lead guard barked, grabbing Brandon's shoulder with massive, unforgiving hands. You bypassed the main security checkpoint, and you are violently disturbing the hospital patients. You are leaving the premises immediately. Brandon did not fight them. He did not scream. He did not protest. The complete and total mathematical destruction of his ego had utterly paralyzed him. The golden child simply went completely limp. The guards practically dragged him out of the cafeteria, his feet dragging uselessly across the linoleum floor. Nia picked up her coffee, took a slow, calculated sip, and smiled. The audit is officially complete. Nia watched the heavy cafeteria doors swing shut behind the struggling security guards. The frantic, pathetic sounds of my brother fading into the sterile quiet of the hospital corridor. She meticulously adjusted the cuffs of her beige trench coat, set her coffee cup down, and turned her sharp, analytical gaze back to me. The audit is complete. She repeated, her tone shifting from the theatrical disdain she had used on Brandon to a register of pure predatory calculation. But I did not just audit your brother's pathetic excuse for a company, Clara. I audited your father. I leaned forward over the laminate table, my deep exhaustion momentarily forgotten. What exactly did you find, Nia? Nia reached back into the thick manila envelope and pulled out a secondary document. It was a single sheet of heavy stock paper bearing the unmistakable embossed seal of the local county registrar. 3 weeks ago, when I first discovered the glaring discrepancies in Brandon's financial portfolio, I realized something vital. She explained, her voice a low, steady hum. Brandon is fundamentally incapable of orchestrating a complex $50,000 federal fraud on his own. He is far too lazy. Richard was the true architect, so I decided to play a very specific role. I played the naive, wealthy future daughter-in-law, seeking serious financial advice from her wise father-in-law. She slid the stamped paper across the table toward me. I invited Richard to a private lunch. I told him that my father was extremely traditional. I told him that Marcus would only officially bless the marriage if Brandon's company showed significant, tangible, collateralized backing. I casually suggested that Richard temporarily pledge the family home as a formal surety bond against Apex Logistics, just to show my family he had absolute unwavering faith in his son's venture. I stared down at the document, my eyes tracing the formal legal jargon. It was a fully notarized, legally binding lien. Richard had literally leveraged the house. He signed the paperwork without a single moment of hesitation. Nia continued, a dark, deeply satisfied smile playing on her lips. He was so completely blinded by his desperate clawing need to secure my family's wealth that he legally bound his sole remaining physical asset directly to a completely fraudulent corporate entity. The sheer devastating scale of her brilliance left me speechless. You attached his house to Apex Logistics. Exactly, Nia confirmed smoothly. Because the federal authorities are freezing all assets connected to that fake company under the wire fraud statute, the federal asset forfeiture protocols will automatically trigger. They will not just freeze his checking accounts, Clara. The government is going to seize the physical property. Richard and Susan are not just penniless. By Monday morning, they will be legally evicted by federal marshals. I looked at Nia, feeling a profound sense of awe. She had weaponized their own bottomless greed to vaporize the very foundation of their false empire. Consider it my final wedding gift to you, Nia said, standing from the booth. You saved me from marrying a parasite. I simply returned the favor by completely exterminating the infestation. She gave me one final nod before walking out of the cafeteria, leaving me alone with the undeniable proof that my family had finally permanently destroyed themselves. I sat alone in the sterile cafeteria for a long time after Nia walked out. The heavy manila envelope rested in my hands, feeling like an absolute anchor of justice. My phone buzzed in my pocket, pulling me back to the immediate reality. It was a mass text message. The sender was Marcus Nia's father, and the recipient list was the exact same curated group of wealthy elites, country club members, and extended relatives I had emailed just hours prior. Marcus was a legendary corporate litigator, and he did not believe in subtle exits. He believed in scorched earth. I opened the message, savoring the ruthless precision of his legal prose. To our esteemed friends and family, the text began. It is with a profound sense of relief that the Washington family officially announces the immediate and permanent cancellation of the engagement between Nia and Brandon Harrison. Following a private forensic financial audit, we have discovered that Brandon and his father, Richard, have engaged in systemic, multi-layered federal wire fraud and aggravated identity theft. They attempted to utilize our daughter's impending marriage as a vehicle to launder stolen funds and artificially inflate a fictitious corporate entity. Marcus did not stop there. He twisted the knife with absolute professional glee. Furthermore, he wrote, "My law firm is currently acting as direct outside counsel to the Federal Bureau of Investigation Cybercrimes Division. We have gladly surrendered all relevant communication logs, forged tax documents, and Internet protocol data to Special Agent Miller. Any individual who continues to financially or socially associate with the Harrison family may find themselves subject to federal subpoena. We strongly advise you to sever all contact immediately." The engagement was not just broken, it was violently publicly executed. My phone immediately rang. It was an unknown number, but the local area code gave it away. I answered it, placing the phone to my ear without saying a word. Clara. My mother's voice was a hollow, echoing rasp, stripped completely of its usual arrogant polish. She was sobbing a deep, ugly sound that I had never heard her make in my entire 32 years of life. Clara, please. Federal marshals just posted a bright red notice on our front door. They are changing the locks. Richard is having a panic attack on the front lawn. The neighbors are standing on their porches watching us. Nia's father just sent that horrifying message to the entire country club. We are ruined. We have absolutely nothing left. You have to call your lawyers and make this stop. We are your blood. I listened to her weep, staring at the empty plastic coffee cup on the table. For years I had craved her validation. I had begged for her maternal warmth while she happily drained my bank accounts to fund her golden child. Now she was finally begging me. "Susan," I said, keeping my voice as flat and unyielding as a sheet of ice. Blood does not give you a license to steal my identity. Blood does not give you permission to abandon my dying daughter. You built a house of cards on top of my stolen credit, and you handed a match to a federal auditor. This is not my doing. This is gravity. I disconnected the call before she could scream another word. I blocked the local area code entirely. The engagement was dead, the house was seized, and the golden child was officially a federal suspect. I stood up, threw my coffee cup in the trash, and walked to the elevator. It was time to go back to Lily. I walked into the pediatric intensive care unit, the soft, rhythmic beeping of the monitors instantly soothing my frayed nerves. Lily was sitting up slightly, her small hands clutching a stuffed bear. Her color was significantly better. The surgical team had just completed their evening rounds and delivered the best news I had heard in an entire year. The procedure was a complete success. Her tiny body was fully accepting the new valve. As I sat beside her, gently holding her warm hand, my phone vibrated with a priority encrypted message from Gregory. The federal seizure of the Harrison family estate had been absolute, but Richard and Susan had attempted one final, desperately pathetic maneuver. Locked out of their suburban mansion and completely destitute, they had piled into Susan's car and driven straight to the luxury high-rise condo in downtown Seattle. It was the sprawling two-bedroom penthouse Brandon had been renting for the past year to maintain his fake executive persona. They assumed it was their ultimate safe harbor. They actually believed they could simply retreat to the penthouse, order takeout, and wait for the legal storm to miraculously blow over. They were tragically mistaken. When I had initiated the forensic audit 3 weeks ago, I discovered a hidden detail that Nia had missed. Brandon had explicitly forged my signature to act as the primary financial guarantor on the luxury lease. Instead of immediately reporting the forgery to the property management company, I instructed Gregory to quietly negotiate a corporate buyout of the unit. I purchased the condo through a blind trust the very next day. I was technically their landlord. Gregory's text message contained a secure video link from the newly installed security camera in the penthouse hallway. I tapped the link, watching the live feed on my phone screen. Richard, Susan, and Brandon were standing in front of the sleek black door of the condo. Brandon was frantically swiping his electronic key fob, but the indicator light flashed a solid, unforgiving red. The digital locks had been remotely wiped and changed. Taped directly to the center of the black door was a pristine white document inside a clear plastic sleeve. It was a formal 30-day eviction notice. But because they had never actually paid a single cent of rent with legitimate funds, and because the lease was actively secured through documented federal wire fraud, the 30 days was merely a strict legal formality. Gregory had attached a specialized legal addendum. It clearly stated that due to the ongoing Federal Bureau of Investigation probe and the fraudulent nature of the original lease agreement, the premises were entirely sealed by the owner. I watched the silent video feed as Richard aggressively ripped the notice off the door. He read the bold header, his shoulders instantly slumping in total agonizing defeat. He pointed a shaking finger to the signature line at the bottom of the page. I knew exactly what he was looking at. The official property owner was listed as Clara Harrison. Susan covered her mouth with her hands, slowly sliding down the polished hallway wall until she was sitting on the carpet. Brandon just stared directly up at the security camera, finally realizing I had bought the last piece of solid ground out from under his feet. They had no money, no home, and absolutely nowhere left to hide. The trap was permanently snapped shut. I closed the video application on my phone, the screen fading to black. The satisfaction I felt was entirely absolute. For 32 years, I had been bound to a family that treated my existence as a transaction. They had demanded my loyalty while systematically attempting to destroy my future. Now they were staring at a locked door, entirely consumed by the consequences of their own malicious greed. I put the phone in my pocket and turned my full attention back to the only family that actually mattered. Lily opened her eyes, offering a weak but genuine smile. I kissed her forehead, knowing she would never have to meet the people who had tried to steal her life. The federal justice system moves with a slow, grinding inevitability. It took exactly 42 days for Special Agent Miller to finalize the grand jury indictments. Gregory called me on a crisp Tuesday morning in October with the official update. I was sitting in my corner office reviewing the phenomenal third-quarter earnings for my health tech firm. They executed the arrest warrants at dawn. Gregory reported, his voice crisp and entirely professional. The federal marshals located them at a budget extended-stay motel on the outskirts of Tacoma. Richard and Brandon were taken into custody without incident. They are currently being processed at the Federal Detention Center. The Bureau formally charged them with multiple counts of wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and bank fraud. Given the sheer volume of digital evidence, the prosecuting attorney is not offering a plea deal. They are facing a minimum of 8 to 10 years in federal prison. And Susan, I asked, staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the Seattle skyline. She was not indicted, Gregory confirmed, but she is entirely alone. Her social circle has completely abandoned her. She is relying on state assistance to pay for a room in a boarding house. The federal asset forfeiture seized every remaining dollar. She has absolutely nothing left. I thanked Gregory and ended the call. The final ledger was officially balanced. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a freshly printed legal document. It was a court order signed by a Superior Court judge yesterday afternoon. It officially granted my petition for a legal name change. I had entirely dropped the Harrison surname for both myself and my daughter. We were officially severed from their toxic history. That evening, I brought Lily home to our secure, quiet estate. She was fully recovered, her small feet echoing loudly on the hardwood floors as she ran toward her playroom. I stood in the kitchen pouring a glass of red wine and listened to her laugh. The house was peaceful. The air felt remarkably light. I had not just survived my family. I had methodically dismantled their parasitic existence and built an impenetrable fortress for my daughter. I took a slow sip of the wine, perfectly content in the absolute beautiful silence of my victory.